Camping had always been a ritual for me and my older brother, Rich. There was something about being deep in the wilderness, completely cut off from the world, that felt freeing. No phones, no traffic, no noise. Just the two of us, the crackling of a campfire, and the stillness of the forest. This trip was no different, or at least that's what we thought. Rich had found a remote spot in the Appalachian wilderness. No marked trails, no nearby campsites, just pure isolation. We had to hike a few miles in to get there, which meant no crowds, no noise. Exactly the kind of place we wanted. We arrived just before sunset, following a narrow, overgrown path that felt like it hadn't been used in years. The deeper we went, the quieter the world became. No birds, no wind, no distant rustling of small animals in the brush. Just silence. After an hour of hiking, we found a small clearing nestled between the trees. It seemed perfect. Flat ground, enough space for a fire, and most importantly, no signs of other people. But as I dropped my pack and looked around, something didn't feel right. There were things scattered around the site. A single, mud-caked hiking boot. A broken trekking pole snapped in half like someone had stomped on it. A rusted-out hunting knife lying near the tree line, the blade dulled with age. I stared at them, an uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. "Dude," I said, nudging the boot with my foot. "This isn't normal." Rich shrugged, already focused on setting up the tent. Probably just old gear. People lose stuff all the time, but this didn't feel like lost gear. Felt like someone had left it behind. And if that was the case, why? The thought sent a shiver through me, but I pushed it down. We'd been on plenty of camping trips. We were fine. We finished setting up, built a fire, and cooked some dinner as the last light faded from the sky. I tried to let the warmth of the fire drive away my unease, and for a while it worked, until I saw something flicker through the trees. A distant glow, small, unsteady, a campfire, except we were supposed to be alone. At first, I wasn't even sure if I was seeing it correctly. The trees were thick and the darkness made everything blend together, but beyond the branches, a faint glow flickered, small, orange, unmistakably fire. I sat up, my breath hitching. "Rich," I whispered, nudging him. "Look." He turned, following my gaze. His eyes narrowed, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. "That wasn't there before," he finally muttered. "It wasn't. We had been here for hours, and the only light in the forest had been our own fire. We hadn't passed any other campsites, hadn't seen a single person. So where the hell had this fire come from? Someone must have hiked in after dark," Rich reasoned. "From where?" I asked. "There are no trails that way." He didn't respond, and I could tell he was trying to convince himself as much as me. We both stared at the distant flame, waiting for something, movement, a shadow, the sound of voices. But nothing happened. No figures moved in front of it. No one tended to it. No logs being tossed into the flames, no crackling of firewood breaking apart. Just the fire, flickering in the darkness, standing perfectly still. My stomach tightened. There was something unnatural about it. Campers didn't just sit silently in the dark, doing nothing. A fire meant people. But whoever had made that fire wasn't acting like a normal camper. The unease from earlier, the abandoned gear, the suffocating silence crept back over me. "This is weird," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Rich exhaled sharply, rubbing his face. "Dude, it's just some guy. We're psyching ourselves out." But we both knew this wasn't normal. The Appalachian wilderness wasn't a place where people just appeared out of nowhere after dark. Still, what were we supposed to do? We weren't about to hike back in the dark just because of some creepy fire. So we forced ourselves to focus on our own camp. We ate, barely speaking, trying to ignore the fire glowing through the trees. It didn't work. The longer we sat there, the heavier the woods felt. Like something was pressing in unseen. Like the trees themselves were listening. By the time we finished eating, the distant fire was still burning. Still motionless. Still wrong. Rich yawned, stretching. "All right, I'm calling it. We've got a long hike tomorrow." I hesitated. I didn't want to close my eyes. Didn't want to lie there knowing that whatever was out there could still be watching. What if it gets closer? I asked. "If it does, we'll hear it," Rich said, crawling into his tent. "Just get some sleep." He was out within minutes. I lay there, staring at the fabric of my tent, listening. The fire was still out there. I knew it. And then, a sound. A footstep. Somewhere beyond the clearing. Another. And another. Slow, measured, coming closer. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped. Silence. A long, stretching, waiting silence. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself to stay still. Maybe it's just an animal. Maybe. But deep down, I knew better. Someone was out there, and they were standing still, watching. I don't know what woke me. There was no sound, no movement, just an overwhelming sense of wrongness. I blinked, disoriented. My breath came out in short, shallow bursts. Something wasn't right. I reached for my phone. 3:12 a.m. Outside, the night was still. Too still. No wind. No insects. No rustling of leaves. Nothing. Then, through the thin mesh of my tent, I saw it. The distant fire was still burning, and between us and the fire, figures. Tall, dark silhouettes stood among the trees. Motionless. Facing us. My body locked up. My fingers dug into the fabric of my sleeping bag. I wasn't imagining this. There were too many. At least 10. Maybe more. They weren't moving. They weren't talking. They were just standing there, watching. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to stay quiet. Think. Don't panic. But my mind was screaming. Who were they? How long had they been there? I turned slowly, heart hammering, and reached toward Rich's tent. My hand shook as I pressed my fingers against the fabric. Rich, I whispered. No response. I tried again, slightly louder. Rich, wake up. There was a rustle, a quiet groan, then the sound of his tent zipper slowly sliding down. He peeked out and froze. I could hear his breath catch in his throat. A long, tense pause, then barely above a whisper. What the hell? I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. We both just sat there, staring at the unmoving figures in the trees. And then, one of them stepped forward. The moment that first figure stepped forward, my blood ran cold. Then another moved. And another. Not fast. Not chaotic. Just deliberate. Like they knew exactly what they were doing. I felt Rich tense beside me. Neither of us spoke. We just watched. Then I noticed something worse. They weren't making a sound. No crunching leaves. No twigs snapping underfoot. The forest was too quiet. A deep, unnatural silence pressed down on us, heavy and suffocating. Then, from somewhere in the trees, a low, vibrating hum. The sound wasn't human. Wasn't an animal. It was something else. And it was close. Then the fire in the distance flickered out. Gone in an instant. Rich's breathing hitched. We need to run. I nodded, barely able to swallow the lump in my throat. We moved slowly at first, stepping backward toward the tents. Then Rich ripped the zipper open and we bolted. Branches lashed at my face. My lungs burned. My heart slammed against my ribs. Behind us, footsteps. But they weren't running. They were walking. Rhythmic. Measured. Like they already knew where we were going. I risked one glance over my shoulder. And I wished I hadn't. Pale, smooth faces with no eyes, no mouth. Blank. Expressionless. And watching us anyway. I nearly tripped over my own feet. Don't look back. Rich snapped. I forced my eyes forward, sprinting harder, my legs burning with exhaustion. The car. We just had to make it to the car. It was the only thing standing between us and whatever the hell was out there in those woods. The car was in sight, but it still felt impossibly far. Every step was a battle, my legs ached, my lungs burned, but I didn't stop. Rich was a few feet ahead of me, pushing forward with everything he had. Behind us, the footsteps never changed. Still walking. Still following. Never rushing. Never chasing. As if they already knew how this would end. I could feel their presence behind me, the weight of unseen eyes pressing into my back. The air was thick, suffocating. My vision tunneled. All that mattered was the car. Then a sudden thud. Rich had tripped. I skidded to a stop just as he scrambled back up, his face twisted in terror. His voice was barely human when he gasped it. They're closer. I didn't dare turn around. We told ourselves we were safe, that we had escaped. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The silence in the car was suffocating. Rich stared straight ahead, his hands gripping the wheel like he was afraid to let go. The headlights cut through the empty road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being watched. We didn't talk about it. Not that night, not the next day, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Where exactly had we been? What the hell were those things? I pulled up Google Earth trying to retrace our route, and that's when I realized it wasn't there. The road we had driven down didn't exist. The clearing where we camped? Gone. No trails. No markings. No records of any campsite ever being there. I checked again. And again. Nothing. It was as if the place had been wiped off the map. I texted Rich a screenshot. "Dude, this place isn't real." His response came a minute later. "Then stop looking for it." That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside my window made my skin crawl. I kept telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Then, at 3:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. A message. From an unknown number. No words. Just a single image. A photo of our tent. Taken from the outside.